The wind had a voice that night. It whispered and moaned through the white pines and oaks that lined the Appalachian ridges, brushing the thin layer of melting snow that clung stubbornly to the northern slopes. Sarah tightened her scarf and pulled her coat closer around her, feeling the cold bite at the back of her neck. Beside her, Mark stooped to adjust the straps on his backpack, muttering about sore shoulders and blisters from the day's climb. They had been hiking for 10 hours, traversing ridges and creek crossings, and finally at dusk, they stumbled into a small clearing to set up camp. The firewood they collected crackled under Mark's axe, sparks dancing in the air. They cooked a simple meal of instant noodles and canned beans, the aroma comforting in the chill. Around them, the forest seemed still, but that stillness felt too deep. It pressed on them like the silence had weight. The usual night sounds, the call of an owl, the rustle of leaves, were subdued, muted, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Then came the guitar. It was faint at first, a few off-key strums, almost blending into the wind. Sarah froze, straining her ears. Mark raised an eyebrow, trying to locate the source. "Probably another hiker," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The sound grew louder, notes plucking from the darkness, low and uneven. A voice followed the strings, a low, almost whispered tune that carried on the ridge like a shadow of melody. Through the firelight, Sarah saw movement. Beyond the flicker of their small campfire, a figure emerged from the trees, tall and thin, guitar slung over his shoulder. At his side, a dog padded quietly, ears perked. The man did not call out. He simply stood at the tree line watching. Mark stepped forward, trying to appear casual. "Hey there," he called. "We've got some space by the fire if you'd like to join." The man raised his head slowly. His eyes reflected the firelight, distant and cold, almost predatory. His lips moved, forming words they could not hear. Then he slowly raised something glinting in the firelight, a long-bladed knife. "I'm the camp angel," he said finally, voice flat and emotionless. "Watching over you." Mark glanced at Sarah. She shook her head, unsure what to do. They offered food, offered to move, anything to de-escalate the tension. The man only nodded once, then sat down a few feet away, placing the guitar across his lap. He strummed again, low and methodical. Sarah did not sleep that night. Lying in the vestibule of their tent, she could hear the strings pluck, the faint dog pant, the occasional snapping twig outside the tent. Every sound made her heart jump. At first, she told herself it was nothing. A deer, perhaps. But then came the circling. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, tracing the perimeter of their campsite. They were not random. They followed the pattern of the firelight. Mark whispered, "Stay quiet." "Don't move." Sarah froze. The dog whined softly, then a whisper at the fly flap. "I watched you." They did not respond. The night seemed endless. Every breeze carried a threat. Every rustle a warning. By morning, the stranger was gone, leaving only boot prints alongside paw prints etched into the softened soil. The prints were close together, almost as if the man and the dog had moved in deliberate tandem, a silent, patient hunting duo. Sarah and Mark packed quickly, unease gnawing at them. As they climbed toward the next ridge shelter, Mark noticed fresh footprints in the mud ahead. Boot print, paw print, boot print. Someone had moved ahead of them, waiting, watching. They pressed on. Their minds were alert to every sound, the snap of a twig, the distant rush of a stream, the hollow echo of rocks dislodging underfoot. The forest felt smaller now, every tree a potential hiding place, every shadow a threat. They did not know it yet, but the figure they had glimpsed that night had already marked them, cataloged their movements, and chosen them for attention. The Appalachian Trail, which had once seemed a refuge, now loomed as a labyrinth of danger. And the real wilderness, the one with claws, teeth, and fangs, was not the forest, but the human mind, lurking somewhere within it. The sun sank behind the ridges, streaking the sky with bruised purples and molten oranges. Sarah and Mark trudged along the trail, their pace unsteady, their minds still haunted by the night at the camp. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush sent their hearts racing. The forest, once a haven, had transformed into something oppressive, alive with unseen eyes. In the distance, a dog barked, a sharp, singular note that echoed like a warning. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. Mark held a hand up, urging her to remain silent. The sound was faint, then gone, as if swallowed by the trees. But the memory lingered, a shadow across their nerves. They quickened their pace, heads swiveling, scanning the shadows. They reached a small creek, water clear and cold as it gushed over mossy rocks. Mark knelt to fill his bottle, eyes flicking to the tree line. "I think he's still here," he muttered, though he didn't want to say it aloud. Sarah nodded, gripping her walking stick like a weapon. She could feel the tension coiling in her shoulders, in her stomach, in every nerve. A week before their trip, online hiking forums had whispered about a man calling himself Sovereign, a lone hiker wandering the Tennessee stretch of the Appalachian Trail. Reports described him as eccentric, unpredictable, sometimes aggressive. He roamed the shelters with a dog, carrying a guitar, asking cryptic questions, sometimes menacing with weapons. Most dismissed him as a harmless lunatic. But Sarah and Mark now knew better. The forest darkened rapidly. They set up a second camp near a ridge, trying to remain calm. Mark built a small fire while Sarah arranged their sleeping bags. Shadows from the fire stretched long and thin, twisting across the tent walls. Then, faintly at first, the sound came again. The strum of a poorly tuned guitar, low, deliberate, and haunting in the evening air. Sarah's stomach dropped. She crawled to the tent flap, peering out. Beyond the tree line, she saw him. The figure from before, the man with the dog. He stood motionless, guitar in hand, eyes reflecting the firelight. The dog sat perfectly still beside him. For a moment, neither moved, as if measuring them. Mark noticed her staring. "Don't make a sound," he whispered, tightening the straps on his knife sheath. Hours passed. The guitar played intermittently, stopping suddenly, then starting again in random bursts. Footsteps circled the tent, slow and deliberate. Sarah held her breath as she realized the prints outside the vestibule weren't just random. They traced a calculated path, circling their camp. Boot print, paw print, boot print. Every time the wind carried the sound, she felt eyes watching, unseen but present. The night stretched endlessly. At one point, Sarah thought she saw movement in the tree line, shadows shifting closer, but it could have been her imagination. Still, her mind conjured all possibilities. The guitar as lure, the dog as decoy, the prince as psychological trap. Each possibility more horrifying than the last. By dawn, the man was gone, leaving only evidence in the snow and mud. They packed in silence, the forest oppressive in its stillness. Every rustle, every bird call seemed magnified. Every shadow seemed poised to spring into action. Their path led them higher, to a ridge shelter barely visible through the thinning fog. At the shelter, they met other hikers. Whispers spread quickly. "You two look like you've seen something," said a woman, her voice trembling. They described the man, the guitar, the dog, the strange aura of danger that seemed to cling to him. One hiker nodded knowingly. "Yeah, that's Sovereign," she said. "He's been here for days. Been following hikers, testing them. Some say he threatens them. Others..." Worse, Mark's stomach turned. He realized the truth. This was no random encounter. They had been selected, watched, analyzed. Every step they'd taken and every pause, every campsite. They had been observed. The prints, the guitar, the dog. It was all part of a pattern. A psychological game designed to frighten, to dominate. As they resumed hiking, Sarah glanced back. For a brief moment, a shadow flitted between the trees. The dog, or something that resembled it, appeared for a heartbeat, watching, waiting. Then it vanished. The forest seemed endless. They were exhausted, but turning back was impossible. Each ridge, each creek, each bend in the trail could hide him. The line between hunter and hunted had blurred. What had begun as a hiking trip was now a test of survival, a confrontation with a mind capable of obsession and violence. At night, Sarah and Mark lay in the tent, listening to the wind and distant animal calls, but always imagining footsteps, guitar strings, whispers. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by the thought that the man could return at any moment, stepping silently through the forest, his dog beside him, watching, waiting. By the time dawn broke, the woods had not released them. Their hearts still pounded, their skins still tingled with paranoia, and neither could shake the unshakable truth. They were no longer just hikers. They were prey. And the watcher was still out there, somewhere in the forest, circling, patient, invisible. The trail stretched ahead like an unending ribbon of stone and mud, winding between dense groves of pines and maples. Sarah and Mark were exhausted. Their muscles ached, their packs felt heavier with every step, and their minds raced constantly, replaying the previous encounters. Every snapped twig, every shadow moving across the underbrush made their hearts leap. The forest that had once seemed alive with beauty now felt like a trap. By late afternoon, they spotted something unusual. A small clearing with the skeletal remains of a cabin, half hidden by overgrown shrubs and fallen branches. The structure looked abandoned, yet its position was too convenient to ignore. Hunger gnawed at them, and with no other shelter nearby, they approached cautiously. The cabin door hung open on rusted hinges. The smell hit them immediately, a mix of damp wood, rot, and decay. Inside, the air was cold and still, and the floorboards creaked under their weight. Dusty cobwebs clung to the corners, and old furniture sagged with age. Sarah's eyes were drawn to a shelf lined with photographs. At first glance, they looked like simple snapshots of trail landscapes. But then she noticed one photo that made her blood run cold. It was their campsite from the very first night, taken from the tree line, unseen by them. Mark's voice shook as he said, "He's been here. He's been watching us this whole time." On a table lay a worn map of the Appalachian Trail, markings in red ink circling various points along the ridges and streams. Some were labeled "Good Spot," others ominously noted "Quiet Target." It was chilling to see the meticulous planning. The cabin itself seemed like a command post, a staging ground for observation and control. On the floor, dried leaves and dog fur were scattered in a deliberate trail. Boot prints mingled with paw prints, the familiar pattern of hunter and hound. They debated leaving immediately, but the forest outside felt even more dangerous. With no other options, they decided to stay inside for the night, barricading the door as best they could. The small fire they built flickered in the darkness, casting long shadows across the walls. Every creak of the cabin floor, every sigh of the wind through the broken roof made their senses scream alert. Then came the faint sound of a guitar. Low, deliberate, from somewhere beyond the trees, perhaps even closer than before. Sarah pressed her back to the wall, staring at the door. The dog barked once outside, then was silent. Footsteps traced circles around the cabin, slow and measured. It was as if the man knew exactly where they were, exactly what they were feeling, and wanted them to be aware of it. Sleep came fitfully in bursts, haunted by imagined movement in the corners of the cabin. Every shadow seemed to pulse, every sound amplified. Sarah could not shake the feeling that they were being observed, even in the small enclosed space. Mark gripped his knife, listening to the wind and the occasional distant snap of a branch, ready for anything. At dawn, they dared to leave, moving quickly and silently, but the evidence outside confirmed their worst fears. Fresh prints, boot and paw, wove in and out of the clearing. Someone had been there last night, circling, watching, waiting. They pressed on, hearts pounding, minds alert, knowing the forest offered no sanctuary. Hours later, they reached a small trailhead where other hikers had gathered. Whispered warnings about a man roaming the trails reached their ears, a solitary figure with a guitar, dog in tow, sometimes friendly, sometimes dangerous, always observing. Some had fled. Some had barely escaped. Sarah and Mark realized the terrifying truth. This man, this stalker, had singled them out from the start. The guitar, the dog, the cabin, the photos, it had all been deliberate, a psychological game designed to instill fear, to assert control. As they walked further, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line, a brief shadow flitted between the trees. The dog appeared on a ridge ahead, paused, then disappeared as silently as it had come. Sarah shivered. "It's a lure," she whispered. "He's using the dog to track us." Mark nodded. "He's been planning this for days. Watching, learning our routine. We're not safe until we leave this forest." The trail stretched endlessly before them, each bend potentially hiding the man who had haunted their steps, the dog that had stalked silently beside him. The wilderness had revealed its cruelest lesson. The most dangerous predator was not the bear, nor the mountain, nor the elements. It was the human mind, untethered, patient, and willing to follow its prey without remorse. And the final confrontation, the reveal of the full scope of his obsession, was still ahead. The final morning on the trail was cold, bitterly so. A thin frost coated the leaves, crunching underfoot, and every sound, every snap of a twig or rustle of branches, echoed in the hollow ridges like a warning. Sarah and Mark pressed onward, exhaustion clawing at their limbs, anxiety burning in their minds. Each mile felt endless, each turn in the trail a potential trap. They had learned to expect the unexpected, and the unexpected was still out there, somewhere in the forest. By late morning, the trail sloped downward toward a small, remote trailhead. Relief stirred briefly in their hearts, but it was tempered by vigilance. They paused at the ridge overlooking the clearing, scanning every shadow, every tree line. Nothing. Only the faint wind through the pines, the distant cry of a hawk, the occasional ripple of a creek. Still, they couldn't shake the sense of being watched. Weeks later, news would confirm their fear. Authorities had captured the man who had stalked the Appalachian Trail. James L. Jordan, known online and among hikers as Sovereign reports, described his behavior erratic, violent, and increasingly dangerous. He had been following hikers for days, sometimes threatening them with weapons, sometimes just observing silently. Some had escaped, some had not. One hiker was killed, another seriously injured. WashingtonPost.com. For Sarah and Mark, the realization came later through piecing together fragments of their journey. The guitar, the dog, the footprints circling their tent. They were not random acts. Every detail had been intentional. Jordan had been observing them from the moment they entered his stretch of the trail. He had cataloged their movements, noted their habits, and taken photographs without their knowledge. It hit Sarah in the middle of the night, long after they had returned home. She looked at the photos on her phone from their first night in the woods. There, among the trees, faintly captured in the corner of one image, was a figure, just standing, silent, partially hidden. They hadn't noticed it at the time. They had assumed the forest was empty, but it hadn't been. Mark reviewed their trail journal. The prints outside the tent, the shadows flitting in the trees, the intermittent guitar strums. Everything now aligned. They had been prey, not by accident, not by coincidence. Jordan had selected them, had pursued them, had tested them, had relished in the psychological torment. The dog had been a lure trained to move in patterns that would guide attention or misdirect. The cabin, filled with photographs, maps, and plans, was a control center for his stalking. Every move they made, every breath they took in the forest had been noted, recorded, evaluated. Sarah's hands shook as she relived the whisper at the tent flap. "I watched you." The forest had been silent that night, yes, but it had also been alive with his presence. Every noise, every shadow had been his design, and they had survived only because of instinct, speed, and luck. In retrospect, The entire trail had been a stage for his obsession. The encounters, the tension, the fear, it was all part of the same strategy: to dominate, to intimidate, to assert control over the wilderness through terror. They had escaped the immediate threat, but the psychological residue lingered. Every quiet forest, every shadowed ridge, every rustle in the undergrowth reminded them of the thin line between safety and danger. The wilderness, they realized, was only as safe as the humans in it. The animals, the bears, the deer, even the wolves, were predictable. Humans like Jordan were not. Months later, reading news reports of the arrests, Sarah and Mark finally allowed themselves to breathe. Jordan would be removed from the trails, but the forest had changed for them. No longer simply a place of beauty or adventure, it was a place where vigilance had become instinct, and every step forward carried the memory of being hunted. The final revelation, the one that truly chilled them, was this: their first encounter, that first night at the campsite, had not been incidental. Jordan had already been watching them. He had known where they would camp, how they would move, even the times they would rise and sleep. Everything that followed, the shadows, the guitar, the dog, the circling footsteps, was part of a methodical, deliberate stalking pattern. The forest, the trails, the ridges, they were all his domain, and for a brief, terrifying time, they had walked right through it. And when Sarah closed her eyes, she could still hear the whisper, faint but unmistakable. I watched you. The memory of the forest and of the predator within it would never leave them, and neither would the understanding that sometimes the most dangerous creature in the wilderness is not the bear, the wolf, or the storm, but a human mind untethered, patient, and willing to hunt its prey relentlessly.